¿Qué carajo? Tú sopesas tanto más que la raíz. Después parece sorpresa lo que lleva tiempo ahí. ¿Qué peso lleva la masa que te comparte el país? Tanto hay sin H, por más que se chache. De los discursos jefritos ya yo me empaché. Por eso lo de la cosecha y las líneas cuales sogas pa' fuera de la caja son jepecha. Si escapamos unos cuantos, 2 o 3 serán pa' mecha. Que es mejor que decir echa, pa'lante echa, bonfire if you cry. Ponte esto haya, ponte esto y que haya. Y no te vayas en la mala por posibles fallas, que esto ya está paqueado. Pásame el falla, compa, rompa y pásame el falla. Esto ya está paqueado, coto, pásame el falla. Pásame el falla, no tumba el piquete pero frontea al canalla. Tírale la high, si se muerde que se vaya, pero compa, rompa y pásame el falla. Como si fuera mecha esta jaya, que esto ya está paqueado, coto, pásame el falla. Importante, si es lo tuyo, guaya, vamos allá. Si es lo tuyo, guaya. Si es lo tuyo, guaya, vamos allá. Si es lo tuyo, guaya. Pero pásame el falla. Pero pásame el falla ya. No es gratis ni la playa que es tu yoga, ni casarse que es la moda, la joda ni te digo. Y si sigo, verás que hay un montón de las cuales eres testigo. Si es que le pichas a tu ombligo, no te atosigue. Mi hip hopeo es de hormiga, boti no confundas con recoger miga. Pa' la mente constipada un snack de higo, pa'l ego como a la changa fuego. Doble H como un hacho, al destierro los machos, los pichones de pacho que nos cortan vuelo. Contra eso es mi duelo y mi batalla. Quien mallao en calle y pregunta si aquí se calla, pero compa, si monta trompa por trompa, cáguese en quien quiera, lo mismo que ese cabrón. No ha de ser artificial estos los fuegos que estallan. Que use esa botella, tírala que ya está. Y no te vayas en la mala por posibles fallas, que esto ya está paqueado. Pásame el falla, compa, rompa y pásame el falla. Esto ya está paqueado, coto, pásame el falla. Pásame el falla, no tumba el piquete pero frontea al canalla. Tírale la high, si se muerde que se vaya, pero compa, rompa y pásame el falla. Como si fuera mechas esta jaya, que esto ya está paqueado, coto, pásame el falla. Importante, si es lo tuyo, guaya, vamos allá. Si es lo tuyo, guaya. Si es lo tuyo, guaya, vamos allá. Si es lo tuyo, guaya. Si es lo tuyo, guaya, vamos allá. Si es lo tuyo, guaya. Sandrala y Vladi, pásame el falla. No soy Vlad Indiana, pero tengo mis misterios. Estoy tan seguro de esto que lo hice compulsorio. Dime pequeño supa, porque en esta vengo serio, tumbándole.
Welcome to Targeted Twice, the Police to Deportation Pipeline. This is an ICE on ICE event hosted by Mi Gente and the We Are Home campaign. Hoy estaremos haciendo la mayoría del evento en inglés, pero habrá interpretación simultánea entre inglés y español. Para escuchar el programa en español, por favor visiten migente.com/migentecomité/live y va a estar el link aquí abajo. Today, we'll be doing simultaneous interpretation into English-Spanish. If you're looking to access the Spanish interpretation, go to our Facebook at migentecomité/live, which will be published right here in the comments. And if you have any problems, let us know. Si tienen problemas accediendo a la interpretación, por favor, déjenos saber. Pero la mayoría del programa va a estar en inglés. The majority of our program today will be in English. So, my name is Sueta. I'm political director for Mi Gente, and I'll be your host for today. I want to start off by saying that, the reason why we're doing this today is because on his first day in office, President Biden ordered a moratorium on deportation, which is a testament to organizing by the undocumented people and immigrant rights organizers that we've been doing for a decade. And as the Biden administration is conducting the review of immigration enforcement practices, we've been gathering stories and working with community organizations to find testimonies from individuals and organizers all over the country, because we believe that no review by the government, by ICE, by DHS can be complete without the voices of those directly impacted. And so that's what these Eyes on ICE forums have been doing since we started them, since the beginning of the Biden presidency. And the one for today is particularly urgent because, as we know, members in our community are in detention and being deported every day. We are holding this event today because one key document about immigration enforcement is set to be released within the next few weeks. This document is called the Prosecutorial Discretion Memo, and it's basically a guide or a set of instructions for ICE agents and ICE directors around the country about who should get deported and who should have a chance to stay with our families. As an organizer, I can tell you that I've been fighting deportations under Obama, under Trump, and the words that are in this document, the words in the Prosecutorial Discretion Memo, how we interpret them, how ICE agents interpret them, how we organize, are really key to fighting for the lives of people in our community and members of our families. And just to say it up front, one of the biggest problems of how Democratic administrations have talked about who should get deported and who should get a chance to stay is that it relies on the same racist systems of incarceration and criminalization that we already know have failed our communities of color over and over, disproportionately targeting Black people. And we're not just talking theoretically. As soon as the new administration went into office around February 18th, the new DHS secretary, Secretary Mayorkas, put out what they call the Temporary Memo, a temporary prosecutorial discretion memo. And it was bad. It made it so that a lot of people won't even have a chance to argue for why they should get to stay against their deportations. And so, for example, in my city, in Chicago, where police just shot a with his hands up, Adam Toledo, in my neighborhood right here, a couple of blocks away from my house. If this same police department decides to racially profile a member of my family or a member of a community because they consider it a high crime neighborhood, that person might be a target for an ICE raid. And because of whatever gang affiliation they decided to invent, they won't be able to get a chance to argue for this deportation. And this isn't just an example. I wish I was making it up, but it has happened to people that I know. It's been cases of people that we have fought, and we will hear about some of those stories today. Members of our community are in detention and continue to be deported, some still under Trump era policies. We continue to fight this prosecutorial discretion definitions and how it needs to be written. And nice strategies is something that we are organizing to make sure that DHS Secretary Mayorkas listens to us and the Biden administration listens to us. And so this is why we invited Secretary Mayorkas to a final forum. Some of you may have heard our announcements about it and the invitation to hear the stories of our community and our demands. Mayorkas will not be attending the forum. We've been in conversations with DHS, but they have committed to scheduling a meeting with our communities and our leaders. We'll continue to make sure that it does get on the books, that it gets on the books in time to make sure that we're able to have some influence on the policies coming out from the Biden administration. And we're going to make sure that people who are directly impacted and who've been organizing around deportations are invited. Just a couple of housekeeping. Today's forum is being led by Mi Gente, a national political home for Latinx organizing as part of the We Are Home campaign, a coalition of organizations mobilizing to get the Biden administration to take immediate action to protect immigrants. Again, I'm Tanya Sueta. I'm political director for Mi Gente. I also just want to take a second to thank all of the local organizations whose testimonies, whose members are testifying today as part of this forum, and who organize every day to track ICE activity, to fight criminalization, and to organize our communities. And we'll name them as we go along. But okay, so getting into this memo thing and into what we need to talk about today. The first half of today's forum will be tackling something that's called aggravated felonies. This is a term that on purpose is meant to sound scary, and it's one of the main categories named in the initial February memo that I was talking about earlier. What that means is that people who have crimes that fall into this broad category called aggravated felonies would categorically be considered dangerous and threats, and if caught in the immigration system, they would be priority for deportation. So let's break it down a little bit. An aggravated felony actually doesn't have to be either aggravated or a felony. It is a term that's used only for immigration purposes, for federal immigration purposes, and it is defined by an act of Congress, which also means that Congress can change it. And over time, Congress has made the list of misdemeanors and actions that fall into aggravated felonies longer and longer. And in the mid-1990s, when President Clinton was specifically looking to make a name for Democrats as tough on crime, Congress passed that disastrous 1994 crime bill as part of the war on drugs. And soon after, 2 years after, enacted immigration policies that targeted people with criminal records, including adding a large number of misdemeanors and minor offenses to this list of aggravated felonies. Today, the definition of aggravated felony covers more than 30 types of offenses, including theft, filing a false tax return, simple battery, failing to appear in court. And let's be clear, we don't believe that deportation should be tied to people's experience with a racist system of criminalization. But the way that these aggravated felonies are described, it just seems so ridiculous and broad and inconsistent. But so with that in mind, we actually wanted to start our forum diving a little bit more into the impact of policies of the time of the war on drugs on our communities of color. And so I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, Alfred Marshall, who's an organizer from New Orleans with Voices of the Experienced. Hi, welcome, Alfred.
Hi, everyone. Thank y'all for having me. Go ahead. Can you hear me? Hello? Amanda? Can you hear me?
There you go. Can you hear me, Alfred? Sorry.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Great. Yes. Sorry, I had to change locations. So as a way of introduction for folks, I actually wanted to tell a short story. I had the opportunity to meet you many years ago in New Orleans, where this one particular story, I remember you joined a civil disobedience alongside an undocumented member from the Congress of Day Laborers, and we were protesting this mass immigration raid program. And it was awful. Like the raids were awful. They were raiding house meetings. They were raiding Latino stores. But when we did the civil disobedience, everyone was getting out of jail, including the undocumented participants of that civil disobedience. And I remember that the police would not let you out. Specifically, I remember they would say that you had a lot of criminal records. I remember them using career criminal as a descriptive. And it's because you have been targeted by police for so many times. I think this was your 70th arrest, 69 arrests due to the war on drugs, and the way that the Black communities in New Orleans are criminalized. So anyway, I just have that memory really in my head about just, you coming to show solidarity with the immigrant community and the police using their own criminalization tactics to not let you out of jail. But anyway, do you remember that, Alfred?
Of course I remember. That was the 70th arrest. I had got arrested 69 times due to what they call a war on drugs, right? They used that term, the war on drugs, but really, it wasn't a war on drugs. It was war really to criminalize Black people. Under the war on drugs, it's everything that you just defined. right? The aggravated stuff, right? Because what the war on drugs did, it came in my door. I got arrested 69 times simply for standing in front of my door, loitering, and you name it. All these things, there was no laws for this obstructing the sidewalk. But under the war on drugs, they created all these vague laws to criminalize black people under the war on drugs. So I can identify when you say aggravated, those was considered aggravated charges as well, right? Because it wasn't aggravated because I didn't hurt anybody. I was just obstructing the sidewalk or something. But to your point, when I heard that they had a law came into place, I was at the New Orleans Working Center at the time. It was called a carry law, right? And this carry law, what it did was the same thing it did for the war on drugs. It would come into my neighborhood, all black neighborhood with high crime area. So they can just come in, trump up a charge on you, arrest you for not being on your porch or where you're supposed to be at. So when I heard the carry law and I heard what it did, when it was bringing, my family was bringing their children to school, they were just going in the community, arresting them. That's the same thing that happened to us. So that's why, even though I had 69 arrests, I had to get arrested again for that because it wasn't right. It wasn't fair. It's the same game that they played on us with the war on drugs. It's the same game, but a different name. But it's attacking a different segment of people. But it did what it did, right? So, for me, when I hear this, I have to be a part of this panel because, deportation is incarceration. You define it there because when we get incarcerated, we are separated from our family, and that's the hurting thing for me. That's why I'm on this panel discussion. But I remember that very well. It's 70 times under the war on drugs.
Yeah.
And that's get you. Now that don't go nowhere. You go applying for a job, they're pulling up your arrest record. And they look at all that.
Well, tell us a little bit more about just like what has it been like over the last few years in Louisiana? Like how has the war on drugs had an impact in your life, in the community's life?
What the war on drugs did, it came down after you get criminalized under those arrests. People apply for houses, they can't get houses due. Some arrested, some of them get convictions. After back then, if you had 3 felonies, they can actually charge you with a felony. 3 misdemeanors can count convert into a felony. So with that kind of opportunity, that's what I'm seeing now on the ground now. People are being locked out of work. People are being locked out of housing, all under the name of the war on drugs. They haven't committed no serious crimes. It just, those arrests, how they add up and how they add up to a felony. I can't hear you. You on mute?
What do you think about the way immigration uses people's criminal records and this aggravated felony category to deport people?
I mean, it's the same thing. Like I said, I can always associate it with the war on drugs and how you being left out because what they use and say, "Oh, you a felon," or you black and you did this or you did that, whatever it may be, and that locks you out a lot of things that I got friends right now that I'm organizing right now, right? And it's sad to say we got a growing homeless population here, and of course gentrification has happened, but a lot of people, and that's got work in the city. A lot of people right now we trying to put in place, right? Don't look at my criminal record. Don't look at my criminal background because what they do, they judging you on your past, right? And you don't know me that sad judgment like that, right? I mean, everybody make a mistake in life, right? But for ICE to do what they do and how these vegan laws come in place, and when you right now we how they use it aggravated, right? Don't look telling you. It's just a different language they use, but the effect is the same when they did us with the war on drugs. It's the same effect. It's no difference. It's the same deal. And and it's hurt me when I hear that. That's why we got to understand that what they did was they call it prison reform, And what they did was, we got the reform. They closed down some of the jails. We got maximized sentencing, where no long-term sentencing. So a lot of people are coming home, right? But the same people that's coming home, they're supposed to close those jails down. But you know what? They are filling up with the detainees now. So right now, as a organizer with vote, that is something that we're looking at. We winning state-wise, but on the federal level, we see that they are opening up jails for the brown folks. They are studying, incarcerating them. You know, how you can say that, Louisiana right now was, had led in mass incarceration. We still second. Even though they got black people that's coming home from jail, but you filling them up with brown people, right? It's the same matter. You haven't done anything. So it's important that I work with you and the rest of the people on this call to say we're not going to stand for this, right? And the language they use, it's the same language. It's the same effect that it has. They call it a war on drugs for me, but they call it something else for you. Deportation is the same thing, incarceration. So the only way we can resolve this matter is to have these talks, is to expose them in the deeds. And I'm down with it, right? Because when they tell me arresting my brothers on the street, hey, that's me. I'm not free till all of us are free.
Well, thank you for that, Alfred, and thank you for continuing to organize with New Orleans in New Orleans with the Voices of the Experience vote. I know y'all are working hard against criminalization and in solidarity with a lot of the work that we're doing in the immigrant community. So thank you for today.
Okay, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
So we're gonna go. So what is we had Alfred just talk about his experience in criminalization and the impact that the war on drugs has had on immigrant communities and on Black communities. And so now we're going into talking about what does criminalization look like in our immigrant communities. The next few testimonies you'll hear will show specifically this use of aggravated felonies and what it means and how it actually plays out. And so up next, we have a guest, Paul Soak in California, who's an organizer with Youth Justice Coalition, who has experienced firsthand what it means to be targeted by ICE for an aggravated felony, and who continues to organize to make sure that other people are also able to have a chance. So Paul, are you around? Hey, welcome back. So just, thank you for sharing your story with us. Could you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks folks for bringing me on to have this conversation. This is like a real conversation. I just want to first ground this in one simple principle. I'm going to say abolition is not a spectator sport. And let's just hold that for a second and just think about that as we have this conversation and continue to go on. But I'm a child of refugees, again, came out from Southeast Asia, from Cambodia in particular, born in the camps, landed here in LA. That's how we came over. That's how we got our status, etc. But, we got put in the same communities that folks are struggling in, right? With the same support systems that are not meant for folks to thrive. And so, my family fell apart. I ended up in the public school system just like everybody else. But then after my dad passed away, things had changed, right? I ended up really, really struggling with things. Went out to school, went to go get some help. Guess what? I got pushed out, right? How many times have you heard that? Folks reach out for help, you get pushed away, right? Those aren't resources that are given to folks in communities of color. And so I ended up in the criminal legal system as a young person. Unfortunately, went in and got tried as an adult, right? For lacking supports and services. When I needed to step outside and go to a youth center or go to a grief center because my dad had just passed away, or go get some help with my schoolwork or whatever it was, or just to get lunch for the day, that wasn't there. The only thing that was outside was a man with a badge and a firearm sitting on the corner somewhere waiting for me to come out of the pad so he could tell me to sit on the curb, lift up my shirt, demanding to see tattoos that I don't have. That's what they invested in. You got to think about between the mid 1800s and 1980, California had 12 prisons. From 1980 to the year 2000, California ended up having access to roughly around 40 prisons, including out-of-state ones that were for profit. And in that same period of time, they built 4 campuses for university campuses. They invested more in prison beds than they did in student desks. Let's just think about that. right? Because the resources were funneled that way. So what are you going to expect to happen to a young person that's needing something that can't get it because he's dealing with grief for the first time, don't know what the hell grief is, none of that, right? Don't got a mom, don't got no parents now, orphan basically, right? Child, parentless. Like, what do you do? You know what you do when the system comes and then harasses you? It pushes you further away. You know, it pushes you into these type of cycles of displacement, the cycles of criminalization, et cetera. And that's how I got caught up in the system. Unfortunately, went in, didn't get out until my mid-30s, got a little bit of an early kick because folks were out here on the ground working to get folks out, right? Folks were trying to bring folks home. And so, you know, I benefited from that work. But unfortunately, because I wasn't born here, I got picked up, right? I didn't get to go home on the day I was supposed to go home. I got to watch people go home. But instead, you know, I had a private contractor come into the tank, tell me to get up, put chains on me, took me somewhere else, right? Took me to ICE, unfortunately. So, you know, that starts a longer process, crazier process all over the U.S. Been through a whole bunch of madness behind that. But it's just hard to see those type of things for me personally. But today, it's still organizing with the Youth Justice Coalition, organizing with young folks, impacted young folks, to try to bring those supports to the community. Because abolition is not just about tearing down walls and cages, getting rid of suppression and enforcement. It's about eradicating the social issues that bring about the need for those things, or the folks to feel the need for those things, right? Because we don't necessarily need to deport folks. We don't need to build a wall. It doesn't make public safety in my mind. You know, those concrete walls and rebar didn't teach me a single thing. All it did was make me a worse person, to be honest. You know, it's not a place that you go in psychologically well and come out psychologically better. You may go in psychologically fine, but come out psychologically worse. And, you know, so deportation is also a part of that because it impacts folks simply because of where they were born, justice by geography in many ways, if you want to say it like that.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And tell me about how have you talked to people about what it means, or like why people with aggravated felonies or with criminal records in general, why should we get a chance? Yeah, like for people who are not there yet.
Yeah, for sure. You know, that's always a tough conversation, you know. I think the one thing is that folks are always going to latch on to these real crazy stories, right? And just that's all they know about. They don't want to talk about anything else. Folks are stuck in a society that has forced folks to lose their imaginations, right? I want to encourage folks to think about any 2-year-old that's out there in society, right? That 2-year-old will run up to anybody, love them, give them their last piece of candy because they see them hungry. That's what people are born to do. They're born to love each other. They're not born to hate each other. They're not born to harm each other. They're not born to capitalize off of each other. They're not born to go become a corporation and benefit off of other people. They're not born for those things, right? But unfortunately, society has been built in such a way that folks have kind of lost their imagination, to be honest. Like, folks have lost that ability to just love people, right? Because it's been taught for you to go pay your rent, go pay your bills, have a nice car, have a degree, and all these things, right? You're structured to go a certain way. But unfortunately, when some folks don't have those same access, they end up on a different path. And unfortunately, the other path usually leads to criminalization for whatever reasons, right? And folks get caught up in the underground economy. And oftentimes, it's because folks can't get into the regular economy, so they're forced to find their own economy somehow. And, you know, these economies aren't always by the books in many ways, right? Unfortunately. But so folks get caught up in those things. And so I just want to encourage folks to really think about people, not as names and numbers. You know, and honestly, the system, the way it is now, it's a lot of it is because of privatization. It's because of the booms. It's because of for-profit industries, right? It's because they want to build all these centers, and folks are out there lobbying to try to get this really tough legislation that's really like tough on crime, quote unquote, so they can fill those places up so they can make money. They want to treat people as widgets in a supply chain. They don't want to treat people as people. If people start treating people as people and people as human beings and think about each other in that way, and thinking about how we would look at each other if we were 2 years old, we wouldn't even have a need for those type of places. We wouldn't be funding all of these things, right? And so folks get caught up just because they're in a different walk of life, a different road that they ended up on, doesn't mean that you wouldn't end up on that road. Right? It's the same thing for everybody across the board. But the thing is, America, we talk about land of the free, land of equality, all of those things, right? But ultimately, just because I wasn't born here, you know, I got treated differently. Right? For a lot of folks, just because they're walking out of a prison system for the exact same thing as somebody that was born here did, they get treated differently. How is that equal? Right? If you think about it, if somebody that's living under the overpass because they're houseless, and somebody that's living in Beverly Hills, California, if the two of them do the exact same harm, let's just call it harm, not a crime, but a harm, and they come across the legal system and get treated the same way? Of course not. They get treated differently, right? And so we have to think about how we treat people, as individuals, and not just as some, you know, piece of product of some whatever it is, right? That put people there. But, you know, ultimately, I think we have to understand that, again, you know, the impacts of folks coming out of the system, right? Public safety is about thinking about how to bring about accountability without having put them in a box, without having put them in a place that makes them worse, right? Without putting them in a place that separates them from people and then expect them to just come back out and be okay. You can't put somebody in a time capsule for 20 years and expect them to come out and be all right. Like I went in, cell phones were a thing, and I come out, I'm like, gotta learn how to use a cell phone. You know, these are the vacuums and the bubbles. You put people in, you disassociate people, you don't allow them to have contact, you separate them. You know, like what happens to people? People lose things, right? And so we have to think about how do we do ways of accountability without having to punish people, because punishment is not accountability, folks. You have to remember that. And oftentimes folks that are getting caught up in the system, the folks that are survivors of harms, don't even want people to go to jail and prisons. They would rather have something else. But unfortunately, because police showed up or whatever, they end up getting arrested. Now they're being forced to kind of navigate that and work with that. Even if they don't show up to court, they get in trouble. Police start coming to look for them. Why are you running away, right? Because the system is not out there for anything but to lock somebody up. When have you seen a cop go down the street, knock on business doors and say, hey, please hire a formerly incarcerated person? That will make our streets better. Have y'all ever seen that? That's not. They're out there with guns and weapons and firearms because they want to shoot, kill people. That's what they're trying to do. They arrest you to lock you up. They're not there to resolve issues. They're just there to just capture somebody, right? That's rooted in slave patrols if you want to go back in time. Treating the black body as a white man's property. We have to really think about these things. Really think about those things.
Thank you. So last question, Paul. So what does it do when the Biden administration says that for public safety, we need to deport people who have aggravated felonies?
Man, I want to encourage us to think about this, right? They're presuming that somebody that comes out is going to cause harm, right? They're presuming that that person is going to come out to the U.S. and cause harm. Whether that person comes out to the U.S., they'd rather send them somewhere else and go cause harm over there. Right? That's what they're thinking. They're thinking that somebody is destined to be some way. It's a failure of the systems that they've built. They just don't want to acknowledge that. The systems that they've built, they think that when people come out, you won't do anything. But they don't even trust their own system. Right? If they trusted their own system, they wouldn't even deport people. They'd be like, oh, you're okay. We just leave you here. But at the end of the day, I just want to put this out there real simple. Look, when I saw people go to board after 25, 30 years of doing time, and they were ready to go home, old, disabled, canes, whatever, the first thing that the system does is say, hey, let's go find the surviving next of kin or whatever the case may be. Come back and tell us how this person hurt you, and you're still hurting today. Because that system did not want them to heal. That system did not want them to grow away from their pain. They wanted them to hold that grudge forever so they can keep that person incarcerated. The system is just a warehouse, just to lock people in. But for me, for my sake, let's just think about me. Today I work with young people, right? Young people, I support them all over, whatever the needs may be. I'm supporting the whole entire community sometimes. Folks are reaching out, looking for help, support, whatever the case. Folks are coming out of the system. Folks are looking to go to school. We have a high school on site, right? I work with young people that are impacted by arrest and incarceration themselves. And I do a lot of things in the community, but folks don't see that. Folks that know that, but didn't think that I wasn't born here, they'd be happy about it, that are on the other side of the spectrum, I want to say. They'd be glad that I'm doing this. Oh, this guy must have learned his lesson. He's giving back to the community. But as soon as they find out I wasn't born here, what does it become? They treat me as somebody else. Get the hell out of my country. What are you doing here? You don't belong here. But yet in the exact same position, I am the exact same person. But I became this way in working with young people because young people gave me the opportunities. Communities gave me the opportunities. People came through to give me the opportunities. The system didn't do that, right? It was support and love from people and people reaching out and people tapping me on the shoulder, saying, hey, what can we do to help you? That's what makes our communities better. Locking me up, that didn't do anything. It just made me worse because ultimately at the end of the day, I had to shut off 80% of my emotions to survive in that place. That's not being human. I wasn't ready to come out and have soft skills. What the hell were soft skills? I just came out of a box and dealing with grown men all the time. Lost all of that. Had to relearn all that. But you know, the folks that taught me all that again was a lot of the young folks. Showing me love, showing me care. Those are the supports that we need. That's what makes our community safe and whole. And that's why I say abolition is not about just tearing down walls and cages. It's about eradicating the social issues that lead to those things in the first place, right? And so we're abolishing the societal factors that cause people to end up in places where they feel they have to cause harm or end up being a recipient of harm, unfortunately. You know, and I say that as somebody that has caused harm. You know, and so I understand that. And so just want to encourage folks that are in spaces of leadership and folks that are impacted to come up to the front because we are the folks that have the solutions. We have the folks that have the answers to what makes our communities better. I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing all of that love and all the stories to this testimony. Paul Soak, California, organizer with the Youth Justice Coalition. So thank you. So we'll continue. If you're just joining us, this is the ICE on ICE forum, targeted twice, the police to deportation pipeline. It's a forum organized by Mi Gente as part of the We Are Home campaign to put a spotlight on the stories of people who are impacted by immigration enforcement. Today specifically, we're talking about people who have interactions, who have been convicted of, who've had interactions with the criminal justice system, who'd be convicted of crimes, and how some of the policies that the Biden administration is moving leaves people out because of these convictions and because of these relationships with the criminal justice system. Specifically, we're hoping to have some influence on the Prosecutorial Discretion Memorandum. This fancy sounding document is basically a guide, a set of instructions for ICE agents and ICE directors around the country about who should get deported and who should have a chance to stay with their families. And this is usually like once people go through all the processes, and it's really up to just the ICE agent to figure out whether they get to stay or not. And so on February 18th, as the new administration was coming in, the new DHS Secretary Mayorkas put out a temporary prosecutorial discretion memo. And as we were saying at the beginning, it was bad. And they've said that they're going to renew it. They said that they're going to rewrite it. They said that it's supposed to come out in the next couple of weeks. And so this is why we want to make sure to point out what the problems of some of that memo are, and the ways that we believe immigration enforcement documents would serve our community better, or at least not cause so much harm. So just to point out some of the problems, the current instructions, these prosecutorial discretion instructions, empower ICE, specifically ICE agents, to determine who is a public safety risk. What is that? Who is that? I certainly don't trust ICE agents to make that determination, and neither should you. There are huge problems also with undefined categories, like the things that we've been talking about today, these aggravated felonies that are not aggravated, that are not felonies, that include all sorts of crimes and misdemeanors, including crimes of survival, including things that have happened a long time ago, like and for people who like don't give a chance for people to come back into the community. There's also an issue with the way that they talk about gang affiliation, another category that may sound kind of scary to some people. Like La Señora de la Esquina, the woman on the corner, does not want, esos gangueros, those gang members, to be in our community. However, this is also a category that is often arbitrary, that it's labels that get imposed on people by police departments that we know we should not trust, without any checks and balances, without a chance to defend ourselves, without being reviewed. And so, with all of this, to put it plainly, ICE is relying on categories that actually give ICE agents more power to interpret the law, criminalize our people, and choose who gets deported and who should not. And the thing is, these deportations are happening today to people that we know. Just a few weeks ago, Ana, a member of the Adelante Worker Center in Alabama, testified right here with us that her husband, Israel, had been detained, was in detention at the moment. He had been arrested for a DUI offense, transferred to ICE because of the state's harsh immigration policies in Alabama. And just last week, Israel was deported. And Ana is fighting 2 types of serious cancer. And the thing is, that doesn't matter to ICE because ICE justified his deportation under the current prosecutorial discretion guidelines, considering him a threat to public safety. And so that's why we're asking for these guidelines that will hold ICE agents accountable instead of using faulty logic and criminalization tactics that have been used in our communities for decades. And there are elected officials that agree with us. We've been doing our organizing work. Congresswoman Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, Chuy Garcia. These are Congresspeople who have all signed a letter written to DHS Secretary Mayorkas to meet with him about the ICE Prosecutorial Discretion Memo and specifically talk about the people that it excludes and the people that we don't want it to exclude. And so actually something that you can do right now is call your elected official, call your congressperson, and tell them that they too should be signing that letter to DHS Secretary Mayorkas, and that they too should be concerned about the way that this prosecutorial discretion memo talks about people with criminal histories. And so there should be a call to action that you can see in the comments. And so make sure that you can talk to your congressperson and that they sign that letter, because this is part of a bigger strategy that we're building to make sure that this is a memorandum that doesn't harm or doesn't cause as much harm to our communities. Okay, so now I want to turn to the case of Marvin. Marvin is currently in immigration detention, but we have with us his sister, Aide, who's been fighting for his freedom from the outside. Aide speaks Spanish, so I'll be asking her the questions in Spanish and then translating into English for people who are monolingual English speakers. Maybe this is a good chance to remind people that there's actually two streams. You can watch the interpretation into Spanish for this one, or you can watch the English or original right here on Mi Gente's social media. Aide, ¿estás por ahí?
Hola.
Bienvenida, Aide. Como dije, voy a hacer la pregunta en inglés y luego en español. Tú vas a responder en español y yo te voy a hacer la traducción. ¿Está bien?
Está bien.
Muy bien. Entonces, who's your brother? Can you tell us a little bit about him? ¿Quién es tu hermano? Cuéntanos un poco sobre él.
Ok. Mi hermano es una buena persona. Yo lo quiero mucho a él. Nosotros cuando vivíamos en nuestro país hace unos años atrás, mi hermano estuvo presente cuando mataron a nuestro papá y otro hermano más. Entonces, él está vivo por puro milagro de Dios, porque también a él lo apuntaron. A ellos lo asaltaron en nuestro país. Y después que pasó todo eso, mi hermano, toda la familia nos venimos para acá, porque esa persona con la familia pues amenazaban, como que buscaba a mi hermano, era el único hombre que había quedado en la familia y pues quizás tenía miedo que él le fuera a hacer algo. So mi mamá lo que hizo fue que mejor nos viniéramos a este país. Cuando llegamos aquí, mi hermano tenía su vida normal, su trabajo, su familia, y el único error de él fue que él tomaba de vez en cuando. Y cuando él tomaba, él se acordaba mucho de esa tragedia, de lo que había pasado ese día. Y eso fue lo que pasó, que él manejó tomado y lo arrestaron. La primera vez lo deportaron, él nada más llegó hasta el aeropuerto de nuestro país y luego se vino de nuevo por lo mismo, por miedo al país de uno, la violencia y todo eso. Entonces, cuando llegó aquí de nuevo, pues lo mismo. Tomó y lo arrestaron. Esta vez él ha estado 5 años. Mi hermano no le ha hecho daño a nadie más que a él mismo, pero él nunca tuvo ayuda profesional. A él nunca lo ayudaron de ese trauma, porque estar presente y que te maten a tu papá y a otro hermano, pues no es fácil. Y aquí lo único que hicieron fue encerrarlo. Mi hermano ya tiene 5 años y él ya pagó hace tiempo. Ahora él es como que está pagando doble porque él sigue detenido.
Gracias. Voy a hacer la traducción. So just to say what Aida just told us, so her brother is good people, love him. We lived in our country a few years ago and we witnessed the killing of our father and our older brother. It was a miracle of God that my brother is still alive. After all of that, we came to the US because they kept threatening us. He was the only male survivor. And my mom was afraid that he would be targeted too. So she told us to come to the US. Here, my brother had a normal life, work, he lived, but he committed one mistake. He drank. And when he drank, he remembered that tragedy and what we had gone through that day. And so one day he drove drunk, was arrested. This is the first time that he got deported. And he basically got to the airport of our country and then came back because of the fear of violence and the fear that he would get attacked again. And when he came back, he was still drinking. He drank again. He got arrested. But this time he was detained for 5 years. He never harmed anyone but himself, but he was also never able to get any professional help. It wasn't easy, but instead of giving him treatment, they just put him in jail. He paid for his crime a long time ago, and now what's happening is that he's paying twice. Tu hermano, yo sé que está ahorita en una huelga de hambre. Your brother right now is, from what I understand, in a hunger strike. ¿Cómo está tu hermano y qué es lo que, por qué está en huelga de hambre? How's your brother and why is he in a hunger strike?
Sí, mi hermano está en huelga de hambre. Hoy tiene 52 días sin comer. Y hemos tratado de su liberación 2 veces, pero ICE está poniéndole cargos que no son ciertos. No hay en qué delitos ponerle y sigue hoy. Él tiene la corte el 4 de mayo y pues él va a tener 59 días sin comer.
My brother has gone without eating for 52 days. We've tried to free him several times, but ICE keeps making up crimes for him that he actually doesn't have. He has court on May 4th, and on that day, he'll have been on a hunger strike for 59 days. Para terminar, Aide, what would be your message to President Biden or Secretary Mayorkas? ¿Cuál sería tu mensaje al presidente Biden o al secretario Mayorkas del Departamento de Seguridad Nacional?
Pues para mí siento que deberían de cerrar esas detenciones que ayudan más a las personas. Es como que no tuvieran corazón, son muy inhumanos. No importa lo que les pueda pasar a una persona ahí y no es justo. Que le pongan más atención a todas esas personas que detienen ahí, que están pagando doble, porque no es fácil.
I feel like we should shut down the detention centers and instead help people. Right now, ICE has no heart. They act inhumanely. It's not just. I think that they should care more about what happens to people when they're there and the people who are paying twice for the actions that they've committed. Muchas gracias, Aide. ¿Algo último que quieras decir? Any last things you want to say?
Sí, que eso nos ha impactado mucho a nosotros, la familia, porque es algo que nos despertamos y lo primero que nos preguntamos es cómo él está, en qué situación lo tiene, porque ha pasado muchas cosas ahí y todo eso nos transmite. Entonces, no es fácil, para nosotros no es fácil lo que estamos pasando. Mi mamá se nos está enfermando. Lo que está haciendo ICE con mi hermano, nos lo está haciendo a nosotras, toda su familia también, no solo él, nosotros también.
Gracias. The things that ICE is doing to my brother, ICE is doing to us. We wake up every day thinking about him, wondering what situation he's in. A lot of things because they don't treat him well, and all of that is transferred to us. My mother is getting sick, and basically it's having an impact because everything that ICE is doing to my brother, they're doing to us. Muchas gracias, Aide.
Gracias.
Thank you. So once again, my name is Tanya Sueta. I'm the political director for Mi Gente. You're listening to a forum on targeted twice at the police to deportation pipeline. And we're going to continue with testimonies about people who've been criminalized and twice punished with deportation, specifically trying to influence the prosecutorial discretion memo and the way that the Biden administration is thinking about deportations of our community members. Next up, we're gonna hear a testimony from Gabi Solano. Gabi Solano is a survivor of domestic violence. She is currently detained at an ICE facility in Aurora, Colorado. Solano is expected to be released from prison after serving 20 plus years of incarceration for the actions of her abusive boyfriend. But she's now facing deportation to Mexico after being released, a country that she left as a baby, and that where she might also experience dangerous conditions. She's also had to be in detention all through the COVID pandemic and experiencing those dangerous conditions there. I should say the testimony is going to be a video. Originally, Gabi was going to call in from immigration detention, but it just so happens that this forum is at the time and on the day where a lot of the deportations, the planes start leaving. And so immigration detention shuts off the phones so that people can't be communicating while the deportations are happening and while the planes are taking flight. And so up next, we're going to hear a recorded testimony from Gabi Solano.
Hi, Gabby. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, my name is Gabriel Solano. I was born in Sonora, Mexico. When I was 2 years old, my parents decided to move to California to give me and my sister a better life. I grew up in a fairly normal household in the suburbs in LA County. I was I did fairly well in school. Joined a lot of activities and you know, I was an honor roll in school. However, I had lost, I would say, not the trust in my mom. So I never went to my mom for any of my problems. So somewhere around my sophomore, junior year, I started hanging out with the wrong crowd, and I was into the peer pressure and just trying to fit in somewhere because I felt like I didn't fit in at home. So I started hanging out with the wrong crowd, and around the age of 17, I met my ex-boyfriend, who early on, the relationship went really, really fast, and early on, I moved in with him and his parents, and the abuse started fairly early in the relationship. Physical abuse, mental abuse, and so I went through this for 8 years of just the back and forth of breaking up with him, going back with him. There was a lot of drugs. There was a lot of alcohol involved. For 3 years, me and him moved to El Paso, Texas, to try and better our lives. However, it didn't work out. So I ultimately ended up leaving him in 1996, I believe, and came back to California with my family. Probably a year after I left him, he followed me. Okay, so one night he asked me for a favor, and I agreed to give him a ride somewhere. He had a couple of friends with him, and in the course of that night, somebody ended up dying, and so we all ended up with double life sentences in prison. And so once I hit prison, I decided early on to change my life around because clearly the way I was doing was not working. And even though I had 2 life sentences, I decided to change my life around. I programmed, I did everything that the prison required for me to do. I got my degree. I did many self-help groups. I got I got college education. I got 2 AA degrees, one in liberal arts and one in social and behavioral sciences. And around 2016, I decided to work on my commutation and see if the governor would pardon me. So I put in for my computation, and almost a year to the date, I got interviewed, and December of 2018, the governor commuted my sentence. So he took the 2 life sentences away and gave me a 22 life sentence, and that put me eligible for board, which I went to the first time and was denied. This was in July. And the board felt that I have enough insight into my crime. So they told me to come back in 3 years. However, they called me back in 1 year, and by the grace of God, I was found suitable for board. And so as I was waiting for my parole date, I decided to come a day before and pick me up. So I was robbed of the opportunity to be with my family, to celebrate my freedom, because they immediately brought me to Colorado and detained me here.
Thank you so much for sharing, Gabby. So right now, ICE's policy is to label people with aggravated felony convictions as priorities for deportation. What do you think of that?
I honestly think that is not fair. Somebody that's been to prison is paying for their crime. You know, we most of us have the opportunity to change our lives around, and we do. And I don't think it's right that ICE decides which type of crime get to stay and which ones have to be deported. In my instance, the governor, he kind of pardoned some of my crime. I mean, he found that I was suitable to be back in society. And so for ICE to come and rob me of that opportunity is devastating, not only to me, but to my family, to my community, friends that have all been anticipating this day. And ICE, for me, is playing God, deciding who stays and who goes. So I believe that everybody deserves a second opportunity. We all make mistakes and we all try and rectify them, and ICE is not giving us that opportunity.
Increases if you live in a low-income neighborhood with high policing rates. It's this like circle, like you get policed and then you get labeled as a criminal because you're policed. In Chicago, I was part of a campaign where we started to like look into what this gang database was, and we started digging into the Chicago gang database. We realized that ICE was raiding people's homes based on this information. We realized that it was information provided by the Chicago police that was very random and unsubstantiated. And just in the first year of the campaign, in partnership with organizations that eventually formed the Erase the Database Coalition, we found that 97% of the Chicago gang database was composed of Black and brown people. And a large majority of that was simply Black folks from the city of Chicago. And that there's actually no way to get off it. That you sometimes don't even know if you're in it. And the fact that it's being shared with ICE means that there were people in our communities that were getting raided because they were supposedly identified as part of being a gang, and who were being targeted by ICE based on that information. So to talk more about the problems of using gang labels and the gang database, we have with us Darrell Dacres with the Erase the Gang Database Coalition and Communities Partnering for Peace. Welcome, Darrell.
Hello, thank you for the invite.
Yeah, so can you start by telling us just about how does the Chicago Gang Database impact communities of color?
Well, it impacts everybody, but for starters, with the communities that I work with, you're pretty much labeled in a gang for the community that you're living. So from about 12 years old, most people of color, just if they're considered to live in a gang hotspot area, then they'll be labeled in that gang in the database. And if the officer had a bad day, or if you were actually walking more than 3 people up until about 2 years ago was considered mob action, and you would be labeled automatically in a gang just by walking down the street more than 3 people in a Black and brown community. So if, like I said, if a cop was having a bad day that day and he wanted to write you a contact card and you end up in that gang database, you're in there for life. There is no reversal. There is not a process to take a person's name out of that database. So the inaccuracy of even having it should not determine a person's well-being, their state, or it does not determine their character.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we've known plenty of people in our work here in Chicago that has happened to. Tell me, how has it impacted your life and your family's life?
Well, the gang database, for me, I was arrested at very young ages, like I said, for mob action, curfew, these things, and that put me in the gang database. So the first actual criminal case I got was a fight between some friends of mine and other people, and I actually seen it happen. I wasn't a part of the fight and I joined, but by happening in what was considered a gang hotspot area, I was in the gang database. They made my bond $150,000 for a simple fight. I ended up going to the county. I was in there for 8 months fighting for my freedom because the bond was too high to get out. And even though I ended up getting out on that case, it pops up as aggravated felony assault on my background. So that messed up my living situations when they run my background in terms of housing, in terms of getting loans. I'm still dealing with issues. And even if I get my record expunged, my name would still pop up in the gang database. So I'd still be almost harassed. If a new officer comes in and runs my name, it might come up that I'm in the gang. So I'm an advice prevention program supervisor. I work with gangs every day, and we dealing with numbers that bring numbers down in the community, mediating, dealing with trauma-informed care. And even though that's my job, I'm looked at the same way sometimes by officers who don't.
Yeah, thank you. So, we've been talking all throughout today about how aggravated felonies and gang affiliations are now one of the things that is in that memo about who should get deported by ICE as public safety threats. What do you think about that approach?
Well, when I work with communities and different partnering communities, like right now I'm a part of empowering communities for public safety, and that's communities actually working together to deal with issues in the community. That's what I think is empowering the community, and that's public safety to me. I remember about 2 years ago, or it's longer now, I'm so traumatized by it, but my cousin passed away on the expressway. He was shot down, and his mother, who has no idea she's from Jamaica. I'm Jamaican and Belizean. My aunt's Jamaican. She when her son died, she went to the hospital, and it was just a lot of confusion. And there was another family that died. That someone died in their family. Their family started fighting my family. So the police felt like that his mom, my aunt, was withholding information for them because we didn't have any information about the expressway shooting, and they're like, "Oh well, you're gang involved," kind of situation. So my aunt now, she later on, the next year later, was arrested by immigration, picked up from the gang database, and she was in ICE custody for about 6 months. And that was a traumatic experience for her, for my entire family as well. She was already dealing with the loss of her son, and she ended up losing her home. But because she was a working person and working to, she didn't have any problems or arrests. I believe what they ended up bringing up after the 6 months, because it was like she finally had a trial date, they were going to deport her, but they allowed her. She was able to actually pay for a lawyer and get that date. And in her file, they had, I think, a parking ticket from the 80s. And it was nothing else there. It was nothing in her file. So I'm, because of what happened to my cousin, which was a travesty, they almost used that against his mother and sent her back to Jamaica. And she was able to come from under that. And now she's still here and free. Luckily, the sad part is that is one of the good stories. She was actually lucky that she didn't just get her life thrown away, even though she lost her house and she couldn't mourn her son properly. My family was still going through traumatic issues, dealing with that right now, even still today. She was one of the lucky people.
What would you say to people that are still trying to understand this, that who associate gangs with violence and think like, yeah, they should be deported? Like, how do you explain it to a community member who still doesn't understand?
Well, I don't want to get too crazy with the logistics because I actually know a little bit about this. But I know that where I'm at in Chicago, the police get 40% of our budget, and we don't have a budget for violence prevention. We just get lucky. Sometimes we get the funding and we have enough to send our team out. In the areas that I work just alone, we created treaties between the gangs just because of our relationships with them, and we brought down the numbers significantly. The problem with that is when the crime is up, everybody hears about it, but when the crime is down, people don't always get the credit. So I will recommend that everybody, before you judge someone, allow them to and afford them the credibility to get the trauma-informed care, that you can know about the issues that they're dealing with and possibly bring those down. When a person gets deported, their family is left without a provider, without someone they love. They in another country probably going to try to come back over here. It causes so many more problems to the institution that we're trying to build as far as public safety than it solves. We can actually help these people by dealing with, helping them, if it's financially or just learning what their trauma is, because we all are victims of trauma. But in this situation, I would say Black and brown people don't actually have the resources to deal with their trauma the same way. Like I just told you, my aunt was almost deported because of her trauma. So it's about trauma-informed care. It's one of the pillars that's part of my organization. Learn what's happening in your community, know the people, allow their voice to be heard, and don't try to, trying to get rid of them makes more of a problem for everybody. Let's try to solve the issues and not make a person the issue that they're dealing with issues. Let's all focus on how we can clean our own neighborhoods up and deal with everybody as an individual, and not put everybody under umbrella where, oh, you're a violent, you're in a gang. A person could be, according to this database, a person could be a principal of a school and left the life alone, and he's going to get deported because of something some officer wrote 20, 30 years ago in the book. That's not fair. It doesn't speak on a person's character. And I urge people to understand that if you're for this, that's the type of things that will be happening, and you're okay with that.
Well, thank you so much, Darrell, for your testimony and for this information. Any last things that you think people should know about Chicago or the gang database?
Defunding the gang database is not defunding the police. If there are good cops out there, then they have a whole they have 40% of the budget, like I said, and they're going to still have tactical, whole institutions they can use. And this gang database has just been proven to be flawed. So I urge people to just understand that, like I said, defunding The database is not defunding the police. They'll still be able to do their job, but it'll give people, regular people who don't have a voice, a chance to be able to be heard and live a normal life and do better. Because we're talking about reform, right? We want people to do better. So give them a chance to do better, and let's not make them victimize them more for their trauma. You're muted. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I was just saying thank you. Thank you for all of it. And yeah, Darrell is with the Communities Partnering for Peace in Chicago and the Erase the Gang Database Coalition. So thank you, Darrell.
Thank you again.
And with that, that was our last testimony for today's Eyes on ICE. You know, we put this together today in particular because the Biden administration is set to come out with a new set of guidelines for who gets deported, who's considered dangerous, who's considered a threat to public safety. And this is going to be a key document that will allow us to fight for our communities or not. And so the administration published its first discretion memo in February. They're supposed to come out with a new set of guidelines. And whatever they come up with is going to be a moment that's going to allow us to measure how much the Biden administration is shifting or not on deportations. And so we're organizing, we're gathering these stories. We're going to be meeting with Secretary Mayorkas in the future. And all of this is the result of organizing, and we're going to keep pushing through organizing. We know that this prosecutorial discretion memo is something that's going to be a tool for organizing. And we're going to make sure that it's the best document that our communities, that harms our communities the least, or that allows us to organize for our communities. But this is why we're doing the forums around the country. This is why we're gathering stories and cases. This is why we're meeting with Mayorkas. This is why we'll continue to organize. I wanted to just thank the We Are Home campaign for supporting the forum, Mi Gente for holding it down, particularly our organizing and our digital team. And I want to thank the local and national organizations that have participated today, that helped us put together these testimonies, specifically Survived Unpunished, Detention Watch Network, the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, the Immigrant Defense Project, Adelante Alabama Worker Center, Families for Freedom, Puente, Organized Communities Against Deportations, Abolish ICE New York, New Jersey, Youth Justice Coalition, Erase the Database Coalition. Thank you to all of the individuals that also shared their stories. And we are going to continue on this campaign. We're going to try to make sure that the Biden administration does its best, both in providing our communities with solutions and in the way that they deal with deportations and criminalization. And so again, my name is Daniel Sueta. I'm with Mi Gente, and this concludes our forum for tonight. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Y a pesar nacieron estos lirios, versos de mi delirio, de vivir ahora el futuro sin mediar DeLoreans, pies en la tierra, sin vanagloria, pa'l carajo vivir en un laboratorio, la corruptela dio por secuestrar la historia, no tan por
Yay, okay.
performance.